Hey, listeners, ready to transform your sleep? Cozy Earth is all about lasting luxury and comfort. Their bamboo sheets have been called the world's softest sheets, cooling, moisture wicking, and unbelievably soft. And I can tell you they get better with every wash. And they have a 100-night sleep trial and a 10-year warranty.
But it doesn't stop there. They have bath, sleepwear, loungewears, and even skincare. Free shipping on orders of $50 or more.
Make sure you go to cozyearth.com, use our code INFOGO at checkout to save 21% off. You can find all of this in the show notes. Welcome to the podcast. I'm Wade,
And I'm Kat,
and that makes this Info on the Go.
feeding your curiosity wherever you go.
And you know, Kat, I got this idea from one of our old sponsors that no longer sponsors us. But hey, if any of you execs over there are listening to this, we would love to have you back.
Yes.
Have you ever heard of the story of Burke and Hare?
No.
So imagine living in a city where your greatest fear wasn't being robbed, it was disappearing without a trace. In 1828, Edinburgh became the center of one of history's most disturbing murder sprees, right? Unlike most serial killers, Burke and Hare weren't killing for revenge or pleasure. They were killing because medical schools would pay for fresh bodies.
No way.
Oh, yeah.
Why were dead bodies worth so much money? Who were Burke and Hare? And how many people did they actually kill? Did the doctor buying the bodies know they were murdered? Why is Burke's skeleton still on display today? And how did these murders change medical history forever?
You know what? I think if you want the answer to those questions, you're going to have to stick around and take this journey with us. What do you think?
Sounds good.
Do you want to start off in the medical capital of Europe?
Oh, I sure would. In the 1820s, Edinburgh wasn't just another European city. It was considered one of the world's greatest centers for medical education. Its medical school had earned an international reputation for excellence, attracting ambitious students from across Britain, Europe, and even the young United States. For many aspiring physicians, studying in Edinburgh was the equivalent of attending one of today's most prestigious medical universities.
So, medicine itself was undergoing a transformation. For centuries, much of medical practice had been, well, it had been based on ancient writings and educated, well, really guesswork. But now doctors and surgeons, they wanted something far more reliable. Firsthand knowledge of the human body, observation, experimentation, and the anatomical study, they were all becoming a foundation of modern medicine. So why was anatomy so important?
Well, the surgeons couldn't rely solely on textbooks or illustrations. Every human body is unique, and successful operations depended on understanding muscles, nerves, blood vessels, and organs exactly as they existed beneath the skin. Dissection became one of the most valuable parts of medical education. Students crowded into anatomy theaters to watch professors carefully dissect human cadavers, learning lessons that no book could ever fully teach. Medical schools competed fiercely with one another. The institutions that could provide the most bodies for anatomical study attracted the best professors, the largest student enrollments, and the greatest prestige. As enrollment grew, so did the demand for cadaver.
The law that really created all the crisis and the basis for this episode. So there was one enormous problem. Under British law, only bodies of the executed murderers could legally be used for, you know, anatomical dissection. This law had originally been intended as a additional punishment, as criminals' bodies would, well, they would be denied a traditional burial and instead dissected before medical students. But by the early 19th century, executions had become less frequent. So the number of available bodies, well, they kind of shrank, dramatically. At the same time, medical schools were expanding faster than ever before. So the math, It just didn't simply work. You have more schools, less bodies. And you have hundreds of students that needed cadavers to learn their profession. But only a handful of legally obtained bodies became available each year. The shortage it really created a lucrative black market that the law could not stop.
So enter the resurrection men. Into this gap stepped a new and highly profitable profession, the resurrection men. These body snatchers operated almost entirely under the cover of darkness. Shortly after a funeral, they would quietly dig into fresh graves, remove the newly buried body, refill the grave, and disappear before sunrise. Interestingly enough, they usually left behind clothing, jewelry, and personal possessions. Stealing property was a serious criminal offense, but remarkably, stealing a corpse itself was not clearly defined as theft under the law. To them, the body was simply valuable merchandise. The
Unlike
fresher,
Ed Gein.
oof, the fresher the corpse, the higher the price it could command from medical schools eager for specimens.
You hate it when I interrupt you, don't you?
I don't hate it. No, I just get caught off guard.
So, fighting
Yeah.
back against these grave robbers, I'm sorry. If you were on this side of the mic with both of us, you would understand my laughter. You know, families, well, they soon realized that burying a loved one no longer guaranteed they would rest in peace. Communities, they started to fight back in remarkable ways. Some relatives took turns standing watch over newly dug graves for days or even weeks until decomposition made the body less valuable, to the thieves anyway. Watch houses were built in many cemeteries, allowing armed guards to patrol through the night. You know, wealthier families purchased heavier iron cages known as mort safes. Is it?
Hmm.
Yeah, we'll go with that. Mort safes.
More to
Uh,
safes, more to safes. Yeah.
and these were placed over graves to prevent body snatchers from digging down to the coffin. Others, well, they covered graves with massive stone slabs or reinforced them with iron bars. This was all in an act to protect the dead from becoming almost as important as mourning them.
Before long, fear of body snatching spread throughout Edinburgh. People worried not only about dying, but about what might happen after their funeral. Families delayed burials, altered funeral customs, and sometimes kept loved ones at home longer than tradition dictated, hoping to avoid attracting grave robbers. Now, for the poor who couldn't afford protective devices or private burial grounds, the fear was even greater. No one wanted to imagine the body of a parent, spouse, or child ending up on a dissection table instead of resting peacefully beneath the earth. Yeah, that sounds rough, especially when it was like hollowed ground and everything else back in the day.
There's this place where you can donate your body, and I can't remember the name of it, and we're probably going to do an episode on it somewhere. Where have you ever heard of sky burial, where you kind of let nature take its course?
I've heard of lots of different kind of burials.
Okay, well, this place is where you donate your body, and they just expose it to different elements to see how it decomposes differently
Uh,
in
yes,
different
I saw
elements.
that on an episode of like Criminal Minds or CSI or something like that.
Yeah, we're gonna do I've got it in the on the shopping list. We're gonna do an episode on it.
It was a city where scientific progress was advancing at an extraordinary pace, but where that progress had created a dangerous demand that someone somewhere was willing to satisfy. Before long, that demand would give rise to two men whose names would become infamous: William Burke and William Hare.
Who were Burke and Hare? One of the most unsettling aspects of Burke and Hare's history is that neither man appeared destined to become one of history's most notorious murderers. They weren't master criminals. They weren't wealthy masterminds or members of some secret society like Freemasons or, aliens. They were ordinary working class men trying to survive in one of Britain's fastest growing cities. Yet within a single year, they would commit a series of murders that shocked the nation and forever changed medical history. You know what, Kat? Why don't you tell us about William Burke and I'll take on William Hare?
Sounds good. Well, William Burke was born in County Tyrone, Ireland, around 1792. And like many Irish laborers of the time, he grew up during a period of poverty, political unrest, and limited economic opportunity. Although he reportedly received a basic education, something not all laborers enjoyed, steady employment was difficult to find. Now, throughout his early adult life, Burke worked a variety of jobs. He was employed as a farm laborer, construction worker, and canal worker, taking whatever work he could find. He eventually left Ireland and traveled to Scotland, joining thousands of other Irish immigrants who hoped Edinburgh's growing economy would offer a better future. Burke was known as friendly, sociable, and talkative, kind of like, oh, what's his name?
Ed Gein,
No,
John Wayne Casey.
that one too, but no, the other one, the one
Uh,
with the college students.
oh my gosh, Ed Bundy.
Ted Bundy.
Ted Bundy. Why would
Yeah,
I say Ed Bundy?
we're just missing the tuh sound. I don't know.
Yeah, anyway.
So, anyway, he enjoyed drinking, could be charming when he wanted to be, and generally made friends easily. Few people who met him would have imagined the crimes he would soon commit.
Now, he wasn't driving around in a Volkswagen, just to be clear.
No.
So, William Hare. William Hare was also born in Ireland. Although far less known about his early life, historians still debate many details about his childhood, making him, well, just a little more mysterious of the pair. Unlike Burke, he tended to keep to himself. Contemporary accounts often describe him as a quieter, more calculating, and less emotional. He eventually settled in Edinburgh after marrying Margaret Laird, and she was the widow of a boarding house owner. Through their marriage, Hare became the manager of the lodging house, giving him a modest but, steady source of income. And the boarding house, well, it attracted laborers, travelers, immigrants, and people living on, well, the margins of society. Guests frequently came and went, sometimes staying only a few nights before moving on. It was the kind of place where people could easily disappear without immediately raising any kind of alarm bells. Kind of like
Oof.
Motel 8.
Oof. Well, Burke eventually became acquainted with Hare after moving into the boarding house with his partner, Helen McDougall. The two men discovered they had a similar backgrounds. Both were Irish immigrants trying to survive in Edinburgh. Both struggled financially. Both were accustomed to hard labor and uncertain income. But their friendship quickly grew, and before long they were spending much of their time together. It was a partnership that would prove, well, disastrous.
Yeah, because to understand really how Burke and Hare turned to crime, it's important to really understand the city around that was around them, right? Edinburgh in the 1820s was a city of striking contrast. Elegant stone buildings and respected universities stood only a short distance from overcrowded tenants where entire families shared single rooms. Disease spread easily through cramped neighborhoods. Sanitation was poor. Medical care was expensive, and steady employment was never guaranteed. Many workers lived one missed paycheck away from desperation. Alcohol was it was really a common escape from the hardships of daily life. Taverns and public houses were filled each evening with laborers hoping to get another difficult day. Poverty touched nearly every aspect of life. And for many people, survival really depended on finding whatever opportunity presented itself.
That opportunity arrived in late 1827, though neither man could have predicted how it would change their lives. One of Hare's elderly tenants, a pensioner named Donald, died suddenly while still owing several pounds in unpaid rent. Hare was frustrated. He expected to lose the money he was owed and saw little chance of recovering it from the man's estate. Before the funeral, Burke and Hare came up with a scheme. They removed the body from its coffin and replaced it with strips of bark, filling the empty space so the coffin would still feel heavy enough to avoid suspicion during the burial. The real body was hidden until they could secretly transport it to the anatomy rooms of a well known anatomist, Dr. Robert Knox. To their surprise, Knox's assistants purchased the corpse with few questions asked. The men reportedly received around £7, a substantial amount of money at the time, equivalent to several months' wages for many laborers. For Burke and Hare, it was more money than they could have earned through weeks of exhausting physical work.
The sale revealed something both men immediately understood. Fresh human bodies had become incredibly valuable. As long as Edinburgh's medical students desperately needed cadavers, someone would always be willing to pay for them. At first, they simply took advantage of, natural death. As always, temptation, it was obvious. Waiting for tenants or strangers to die naturally, well, it was really unpredictable. If a fresh body brought the highest prices, they thought to themselves, why wait? That simple, horrifying question marked the beginning of one of the most infamous murder sprees in British history. Burke and Hare had discovered a market unlike any other. They were about to create their own supply chain.
Now, selling the body of a man who had already died was one thing.
Hey,
Murder?
you know what? I think before we get into murder and how it was something different, I say we should take a small break.
Okay,
All right, I want to get a Coke.
I already got my Pepsi.
All right.
So now that we're back, murder was something entirely different. Yet, sometime in early 1828, Burke and Hare crossed that line. Whether the decision was carefully planned or born from desperation is something historians still debate. What is certain is that once they realized how much money a fresh body could bring, the temptation became impossible for them to ignore. Instead of waiting for death to come naturally, they decided to create their own supply. Over the next 10 months, they would become some of Britain's most notorious serial killers, not because they enjoyed killing, but because every victim represented another payday.
So let's get into the method. They quickly developed a method that was frighteningly simple and effective. First they would gain the trust of a potential victim. Many of their targets were invited into Hare's boarding house or encountered in local taverns. They offered food, conversation, and most importantly, plenty of.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Ready to turn an ordinary day into an unforgettable adventure? Check out QR Hunter. It lets you create custom treasure hunts with reusable QR code tiles. You can personalize clues, puzzles, photo challenges. You can do it all in just a few minutes. It's perfect for birthday parties, family game nights, classrooms, parks, team building events, or if you just want to have family fun. The free QR Hunter app, it works with any smart device. The adventure, it never really ends. You can search for QR Hunter on Amazon, or you can simply click the link in the show notes. But let the adventure start today. Of whiskey. And once the victim was heavily intoxicated and really kind of unable to defend themselves, the attack began. One man would pin the victim down while the other covered the person's nose and mouth, at the same time placing pressure on the chest to prevent breathing. Death often, well, it came within minutes, and the technique left remarkably few visible injuries. There were no stab wounds, no broken bones, very little blood, if any, and to anyone making only a casual examination, it often appeared the person had simply just died suddenly of illness or alcohol poisoning. And the method became so infamous that it entered the English language. To burke someone, well, it came to mean murdering a victim through suffocation or smothering while leaving little outward evidence of violence. Wow, to Burke.
That's wild. Burke and Hare had stumbled upon a horrifying advantage. Medical schools wanted fresh cadavers that had not been badly damaged. Anatomists needed intact muscles, organs, and bones for teaching. So, bodies with obvious injuries raised questions. Bodies that appeared to have died naturally did not. At the time, forensic evidence was still in its infancy. There were no fingerprint databases, no toxicology reports, and no reliable way to determine suffocation during a routine examination. Dr. Robert Knox and his assistants were primarily interested in anatomy, not criminal investigations. If a body appeared fresh and suitable for dissection, it was accepted. Now, whether Knox suspected anything remains one of history's great unanswered questions, a mystery we'll return to later.
Here's a big question. How do they choose their victims? They calculated in selecting their victims. They rarely targeted wealthy citizens or people with influential families. Instead, they preyed upon the society that was least likely to miss them. Traveling laborers who had recently arrived in the city, elderly people that were living alone, prostitutes, street beggars, women earning a living through odd jobs, people that were struggling with alcoholism, individuals with no close relatives that lived nearby. In many cases, these were the people that if they disappeared, they just might go unnoticed for days or weeks or even years. And the victims were not chosen because of personal grudges. They were just chosen because of their vulnerability, which is incredibly creepy at the same time.
Well, that's a lot like Sam Little.
Oh, wow.
So
Didn't
the
we do one on
first,
Sam Little?
we sure did.
We did, didn't we?
Now, the first murder must have been terrifying. The second was probably easier. As the money continued to flow, Burke and Hare grew bolder. Each successful sale reinforced the idea that they could continue without being caught. Now, what began as an opportunity slowly became a business. Instead of fearing discovery, they became confident. The killings grew more frequent, the pair became increasingly careless, and according to most historians, Burke and Hare murdered at least 16 people between January and October of 1828. A staggering number considering the entire crime spree lasted less than a year.
Wow. 16 people
That's
in
wild.
just a few months. You know, although not every victim can be identified with certainty because, several names have survived. One was Mary Patterson, and she was a young woman known for her beauty. After an evening of drinking with Burke and Hare, she just vanished. Her remarkably fresh body soon appeared in Dr. Knox's, well, where some students reportedly recognized her from seeing her alive only just a day before. And, there was another victim, Effie, an older woman who made a living selling small household items on the streets. She trusted the wrong people and just never returned home. Perhaps the most famous victim was James Wilson, and he was better known around Edinburgh at the time as Daft Jamie. Wilson was a young man with an intellectual disability who was well known throughout the city. He entertained children with jokes and dancing and was recognized by many local residents. When his body arrived for dissection, several students, well, they immediately knew who he was. Knox reportedly denied it, insisting the corpse belonged to someone else. Whether he truly believed that or simply wished to avoid difficult questions, well, that question still remains in history. James Wilson's murder would become one of the turning points in this entire investigation.
Now, why didn't anyone notice, or at the very least say something? You know, today it's difficult to imagine 16 people disappearing without an immediate police response, especially in the same city, the same way.
Yeah,
But in Edinburgh in 1828, that was a different world. There was no national missing persons databases, no photographs, no fingerprint records, no
no milk
centralized,
cartons.
right, no milk cartons, no centralized. I don't even believe there was mail or milkmen back then.
There was probably milkmen. Milk cartons were just for children, though, weren't they?
Yeah.
Okay, it wouldn't have worked no way. My bad.
So there was no centralized police force capable of tracking disappearances across neighborhoods either. Many people moved frequently in search of work. Travelers arrived and left every day. Poor laborers often disappeared from one district only to appear weeks later in another. Sadly, society also placed far less value on the lives of the poor. When a homeless person or an itinerant worker vanished, many assumed they had simply moved on. Burke and Hare understood this reality. They exploited not only the demand for cadavers, but also the invisibility of society's most vulnerable people. Now, for months, the murders continued without serious suspicion, but every successful crime made the pair more confident. And confidence leads to, well, mistakes. Their next victim would set in motion the events that finally brought their deadly enterprise to an end.
No story about Burke and Hare is really complete without really examining the man whose anatomy school made their crimes so profitable. And we're going to enter in Dr. Robert Knox. And he remains one of the most controversial figures in the history of medicine. More than any other person connected to this case, Knox occupies a gray area between scientific advancement and moral responsibility. Was he simply a brilliant doctor caught in a broken system, or did he knowingly ignore the signs that innocent people were being murdered to supply his anatomy tables? Nearly 2 centuries later, historians, they still really can't agree on that.
Yeah, he knew. I don't think he didn't know.
Yeah, I mean, let's dive into it.
Now, Robert Knox was born in Edinburgh in 1791 and studied medicine at the city's prestigious university before serving as an army surgeon during the Napoleonic Wars. Treating wounded soldiers convinced him that anatomy was the foundation of good medicine. Surgeons couldn't rely solely on books or diagrams, they needed first-hand experience with the human body. After returning to Edinburgh, Knox established himself as one of Britain's leading anatomists. His lectures became legendary. Students packed his anatomy theater, eager to hear his energetic teaching style and to learn from one of the country's most respected medical minds. His reputation spread across Europe and even reached the United States, drawing students from around the world.
But Knox's success created a serious problem. Every anatomy lesson required, real human bodies. And the larger his classes became, the greater the demand for cadavers became. Fresh bodies were especially valuable because decomposition quickly damaged muscles, organs, and delicate tissues that students really needed to study. A recently deceased body, it could be carefully dissected over several days, while one that had been buried for weeks was of little educational value. As a result, Knox was known to pay premium prices for fresh specimens. To him, they were essential teaching tools. To men like Burke and Hare, they represented, easy money.
It's important to remember that Knox was not unusual in purchasing bodies. Throughout Britain, anatomy schools routinely bought cadavers from intermediaries, many of whom were known grave robbers or resurrection men. There was an uncomfortable understanding within the medical profession that if anatomists asked too many questions about where bodies came from, they might lose access to the very specimens they needed to train future doctors. As a result, suppliers generally weren't questioned, and doctors often chose not to know the details.
Mm. Which really created a very unique market. Burke and Hare, they first sold the body of Hare's deceased tenant to Knox's assistant, who examined it, approved it for the purchase, and paid them without hesitation. It was a straightforward business transaction, but realizing how easy the sale had been, Burke and Hare soon returned with another body, and then another. Before long, they had become regular suppliers to Knox's anatomy rooms. Unlike corpses stolen from cemeteries, which often showed signs of decay, Burke and Hare, they delivered remarkably fresh cadavers. For an anatomist, these specimens were ideal for modern observers. However, their condition really raises an obvious question. Shouldn't someone have become just a little suspicious of how fresh they were?
Don't ask, don't tell, okay? So that question has fueled debate ever since. Did Robert Knox know the bodies were murder victims? Those who defend him argue that there is no direct evidence proving he did. Purchasing bodies from grave robbers was an accepted, if morally questionable, practice at the time. Anatomists were interested in obtaining specimens, not investigating deaths. Sudden deaths from disease, alcohol poisoning, tuberculosis, and countless other illnesses were tragically common in the 19th century Edinburgh. A fresh corpse, while valuable, wasn't necessarily unusual. And furthermore, no witness ever testified that Knox encouraged Burke and Hare to commit murder or knowingly accepted victims of homicide. Despite years of investigation by historians, no letters, journals, or official records have ever surfaced proving that he knew innocent people were being killed.
However, there are critics out there that argue that Knox he had to suspect something was wrong because Burke and Hare, they supplied an unusually large amount of, really fresh bodies over a relatively short period of time. The frequency of deliveries alone should have raised concerns. Some reports even claimed that certain victims appeared so recently deceased that they showed almost no signs of decomposition. Perhaps the strongest argument against Knox involves one of Burke and Hare's final victims, James Wilson. And he was a young man with an intellectual disability. And he was really known through Edinburgh as Daft Jamie. He was a familiar figure who entertained children and was really recognized by many people in the city. And when his body appeared in Knox's anatomy rooms, students reportedly believed they knew exactly who he was. And according to later accounts, well, the Dr. Knox, he denied the identification and ordered the body dissected quickly, even removing the head and feet before many students could examine it closely. Whether every detail, of that story is accurate really kind of remains uncertain, but it has long contributed to suspicions that Dr. Knox deliberately avoided questions that he just did not want answers to.
He knew, but he wanted to cut it up.
Yeah, and I think he really wanted to supply his school because that was his bread and butter, right?
Right, right. He was trying to help people learn more about the human body. I don't think he did so maliciously, but he definitely left some moral compasses to the side.
Wait, he had a moral compass?
It's debatable at this point, clearly.
Clearly.
Now, when Burke and Hare were finally arrested, public attention quickly shifted toward Knox. Newspapers questioned whether the celebrated anatomist had helped create a market for murder by paying generously for fresh bodies. Angry cows. Angry crowds gathered outside his anatomy school, and many citizens believed he should stand trial alongside the killers. Investigators examined his role carefully, but despite widespread suspicion, they found no evidence proving that Knox knowingly purchased murdered victims or participated in the crimes. And without proof, prosecutors had no legal basis to charge him, and he was never brought to trial.
Although he escaped criminal prosecution, Robert Knox, well, he never really escaped the scandal. His once glittering reputation, it was shattered almost overnight. Student enrollment, it declined. Colleagues, well, they kind of distanced, themselves from him, and his successful anatomy school, it just never really fully recovered. Eventually, he left Edinburgh and attempted to kind of rebuild his career elsewhere, but the shadow of Burke and Hare followed him for the rest of his life.
Even today, historians still remain divided. Some view Knox as an innocent physician trapped in a deeply flawed system that depended on illegal body suppliers. Others believed he ignored warning signs because the constant flow of fresh cadavers benefited both his teaching and his growing reputation. The truth may never be known. What is certain, though, is that Burke and Hare could never have profited from murder without a thriving market for human bodies. Their crimes exposed not only the brutality of two killers, but also the dangerous consequences of a medical system whose demand for anatomical specimens had far outgrown the law.
You know what, Kat? I say before we get into the murders and how they began to unravel, Coke.
Pepsi.
So for nearly 10 months, they had gotten away with murder. They had discovered a profitable system, found a willing buyer, and carefully selected victims they believed no one would ever miss. Each, well, successful crime made them more confident. But as is often in the case with criminals, their growing confidence, well, it led to their carelessness, right? The series of murders that seemed almost invisible, they were about to fall apart.
One of the first cracks appeared after the murder of James Wilson, better known around Edinburgh as Daft Jamie. Wilson was a familiar face throughout the city. He was well liked and easily recognized. He entertained children, wandered the streets daily, and was known by countless residents. Unlike many of Burke and Hare's earlier victims, James Wilson's disappearance was noticed almost immediately.
So when his body appeared in Dr. Knox's anatomy room, several students reportedly believed they recognized him. And according to later accounts, Well, Dr. Knox, he denied that it was Wilson almost immediately. Whether that actually happened exactly as, described, rumors began circulating that something far more sinister than just grave robbing was supplying these anatomy schools.
Even so, Burke and Hare continued killing. Their final victim would prove to be their undoing, and in October 1828, they targeted Margaret
Dotchery.
Daughtry.
That's what I'm going with.
Okay, an elderly Irish woman who had recently arrived in Edinburgh. Burke convinced her they might be related because they shared an Irish background and invited her back to Hare's boarding house for food and drink. It was a familiar routine. Margaret accepted the invitation, unaware she had walked into a trap.
Hmm. So that evening, Burke and Hare became concerned when two of their regular customers, James and Anne Gray, well, they returned unexpectedly. Rather than abandon their plan, well, they simply hid Margaret's body beneath a bed and urged the Greys to spend the night elsewhere. Their unusual behavior, well, it kind of started to raise a little bit of suspicion. And when the Greys later returned, curiosity got the better of them. Looking beneath the bed, they found a horrifying discovery.
Margaret Daughtry's body lay hidden under the mattress. Terrified, as they should be.
No, not as they should be, terrified as anybody should be.
Right. They left the house and alerted the authorities immediately. By the time police arrived, Burke and Hare had already removed the body and delivered it to Dr. Knox's anatomy rooms. At first, investigators found little physical evidence inside the boarding house, but when officers searched Knox's facility, they quickly located Margaret's body. Several witnesses identified her, making it impossible to dismiss the death as simply another anonymous cadaver.
So this investigation rapidly gained momentum because police interviewed neighbors, lodging house residents, and anyone who had recently seen the missing woman. As they pieced together witness statements, well, a disturbing pattern, well, it began to emerge. Other disappearances, they kind of also seemed to point back to Burke and Hare. Although suspicion was growing, prosecutors, they faced a major problem.
The evidence against the two men was largely circumstantial. Forensic science was basically non existent. Okay. And proving murder beyond a reasonable doubt would be difficult without someone willing to testify about what had happened inside the boarding house. The solution was both practical and controversial.
Prosecutors offered William Hare complete immunity for prosecution if he agreed to testify against his friend Burke. Faced with the possibility of execution, William Hare, he accepted almost immediately, and the partnership that had earned them so much money, it collapsed right then and there.
Hare described the murders in detail, explaining how the victims had been lured into the boarding house, intoxicated, suffocated, and sold for dissection. His testimony became the foundation of the prosecution's case.
And William Burke's trial began in December 1828 and quickly became one of the biggest news stories in Britain. Newspapers covered every development, and enormous crowds, well, they started to gather outside the courthouse, hoping to catch a glimpse of the accused murderer. Public outrage was intense. People were horrified, not only by the killings themselves, but by the realization that murder had been a business supplying respected medical institutions, and they should have been outraged.
Indeed. After a trial lasting just over 24 hours, the jury deliberated for less than an hour before returning its verdict. William Burke was found guilty of murder and sentenced to death by hanging. William Hare, on the other hand, despite admitting his role in the killings, walked free under the terms of his immunity agreement, a decision that angered many members of the public who believed both men deserved the same fate. I'm with the public here.
I'm with the public too, but without Hare, could you really have convicted Burke?
True, true. I still don't think, one right outweighs all the wrongs in this case.
No, I don't either. Don't get me wrong. I don't either. Not 100%. But would there have been enough evidence without a reasonable doubt to convict both men without eyewitness accounts? I mean, there's only two people that really witnessed it, right? Well, three, but only two lived to talk about it.
With Burke condemned and Hare released, one final chapter remained. Burke's punishment would become almost as famous as his crimes, and in a remarkable twist of justice, the murderer who had sold so many bodies to anatomy schools would soon become one himself.
On the morning of January 28th, 1829, William Burke was led from his prison cell to the gallows. News of his execution had spread far and wide, and before sunrise, thousands of people began filling the streets of Edinburgh. Some estimates suggest that there were between 20,000 and 30,000 spectators that gathered to witness his hanging, making it one of the largest public executions in Edinburgh's history.
Public executions were common during this period, but Burke's case was anything but ordinary. His crimes had horrified the nation, if not the world, depending on how far that news traveled. And newspapers had followed every detail of the investigation and trial. And many people saw his execution as justice not only for his 16 victims, but also for the countless families who had lived in fear of body snatchers.
Shortly after 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Burke stepped onto the scaffold. Witnesses described a tense silence falling over the crowd before his executioner carried out the sentence. Within minutes, William Burke was dead. For most criminals, that would have been the end of the story, right? For Burke, it was only the beginning of an extraordinary final chapter.
The judge who sentenced Burke had ordered that his body be publicly dissected, a punishment intended to mirror the fate he had inflicted on so many of his victims. And there was also a symbolic purpose behind the decision. Burke had murdered people to sell their bodies for anatomical study. Now his own body would become an anatomical specimen.
A few days after the execution, his corpse was delivered to the Anatomy Theatre at the University of Edinburgh, where hundreds of medical students, physicians, and members of the public crowded just to witness the dissection. Interest was so great that many people were turned away because the room simply just could not hold everyone that wanted to participate.
The procedure was performed by Professor Alexander Monro, one of Scotland's leading anatomists. According to a well known account from the time, Monro dipped his quill pen into Burke's blood and wrote across a note. This is written with the blood of William Burke. Whether intended as a dramatic gesture or simply as a historical curiosity, the note has survived and remains one of the most famous artifacts connected to the case.
Well, we just did one on quill pen or quill writing. Didn't even think it would tie into this at all.
The more you know.
Yeah. So once the decision was complete, Burke's skeleton was carefully cleaned, assembled, and preserved for medical education. Nearly 2 centuries later, it is still housed at the University of Edinburgh's Anatomical Museum, where it continues to be used as both a teaching specimen and a reminder of one of Scotland's most famous criminal cases. So basically, to put that in perspective, he's still serving out his sentence.
Several other items connected to Burke also survived. Shortly after his execution, a plaster death mask was made by taking a cast of his face. Death masks were commonly created before photography became widespread and were used to preserve an accurate likeness of the deceased. Burke's death mask remains on display and is one of the best-known objects associated with the case.
So perhaps the most controversial artifacts are those reportedly made from Burke's skin. So during the 19th century, it was not really unheard of for the skin of executed criminals to be tanned and preserved. In Burke's case, go ahead.
Maybe I was going to make a bad joke, but I'm going to say it anyway. Ed Gein just lived in the wrong time period.
OMG. I was really thinking that when I was doing that. So we both have really dark humor, maybe?
Maybe not appropriate for all audiences, indeed.
I don't think I'm going to edit that out either. So in Burke's case, pieces of his skin were reportedly used to bind small books and create souvenir items. One such pocketbook, said to be made from Burke's skin, is still preserved in Scotland and has become a grim reminder of just how differently people viewed punishment and public spectacle during that era. And to your point, Ed Gein really just lived in the wrong place because he could have made that pocketbook.
Wrong time, wrong place.
Now, I don't know if they had pork and beans that he could have did his skull eating stuff out of.
Yeah.
Ugh.
I mean, to be fair, he was digging up dead bodies though too. But had he had like an outlet for his urges, maybe things would have been different.
I think if his diagnosis had have been, I think if his condition had have been properly diagnosed earlier, we probably wouldn't even. You know what? Let's add Ed Gein to the shopping list.
Yes.
Okay, we'll continue on. To be continued. Ed Gein, pocketbooks.
To modern audiences, these artifacts raise difficult ethical questions. Should the remains of even the most notorious criminals be displayed in museums? I'd go see it.
I I think if they're gonna do that, they should talk about the victims because it's more about the victims, not the perpetrator.
Indeed. I
Okay.
agree. So, do they serve an educational purpose or do they risk turning real human suffering into curiosity? Okay, yeah, I can see that,
Yeah.
right? Museums today continue to debate how best to present such objects, balancing historical value with respect for human dignity. In Burke's case, however, many historians believe the preservation of his skeleton serves as a powerful symbol. The man who murdered for profit, treating human bodies as merchandise, ultimately became part of the very medical education system he had exploited, which is arguably justice in and of itself.
Yeah. I mean, he's still serving out his sentence. I mean, there's really no other way to say it. His execution brought justice to one of the killers, but it did not solve the larger problem. The demand for human bodies still existed, and unless the law changed, someone else could eventually just step into Burke and Hare's place. Their crimes had exposed a dangerous flaw in the system of British medical system anyway, and lawmakers could no longer ignore it. That realization would soon lead to one of the most important reforms in the history of medical education.
The execution of William Burke did little to calm the public's fears. Across Britain, people were horrified that murder had become a profitable business simply because medical schools desperately needed human bodies. I guess hitmen are out of the question in that case.
Well, we talked about it in the episode. They just wanted fresh bodies.
Hmm. The Burke and Hare case exposed a problem that many had suspected for years. The legal supply of cadavers was nowhere near enough to meet the demands of medical education.
So public outrage quickly turned into calls for reform. Many argued that as long as anatomy schools relied on grave robbers and questionable body suppliers, similar crimes, they're going to happen again. So punishing Burke was not enough. The system itself needed a reform.
And that reform came just 3 years later with the passage of the Anatomy Act of 1832. The new law dramatically changed how medical schools obtained bodies. Instead of relying almost entirely on executed criminals or the illegal activities of resurrection men, anatomists were now allowed legal access to unclaimed bodies from hospitals, prisons, and workhouses, as well as bodies voluntarily donated for medical education. While the law has since evolved, the Anatomy Act greatly reduced the market for grave robbing and removed much of the financial incentive that had helped fuel crimes like those committed by Burke and Hare.
So the story of Burke and Hare has never really faded from public memory. Their crimes have inspired countless books, stage plays, films, television programs, and documentaries, one of which was on one of our former sponsors, which was the idea for this episode. Their names have become synonymous with one of history's most shocking true crime cases. Even the word "burking" entered the English language, referring to killing someone by suffocation while leaving few visible signs of violence.
Over the years, however, myths have grown around the story. Some legends claimed Burke and Hare murdered dozens or even hundreds of people. Modern historians generally agree that at least 16 murders can be directly linked to the pair during their 10-month killing spree. While that number is horrifying enough, There is no credible evidence to support the larger claims that appeared in later folklore.
So the debate surrounding Dr. Knox, well, it also continued because some historians believe he was an innocent physician caught in a deeply flawed system. But others argue that the steady flow of unusually fresh bodies should have really sent off some alarm bells and he should have got suspicious. But really, without definitive evidence, the question of what Knox really knew just was simply never answered.
What is beyond dispute is the legacy of the case. Burke and Hare committed horrific crimes for money, but their murders exposed dangerous flaws in Britain's medical system. The reforms that followed helped create a more ethical and legal system for anatomical education, one that reduced the need for grave robbing and helped shape the standards used by medical schools today.
So, the story of Burke and Hare is more than a tale of two killers. It is a reminder that when scientific progress outpaces ethical safeguards, terrible consequences can follow. The crimes remain one of history's darkest examples of how poverty, opportunity, greed, and inadequate laws combine to produce a tragedy that really changed medicine forever.
If you would like to support this podcast, tell a friend and help get the word out.
If you would like to support the show, you can do so at Patreon, or you can take advantage of some of our sponsors. Either way it goes, those links are in the show notes. And for a limited time, Kat and I have released our entire Patreon catalog entirely free. Go take advantage of it.
And as always, William and I want to thank you for listening.
Whether you've been with us from day one or you just tuned in, a big thank you.
Join the Facebook group at Info on the Go.
Over there, you can get to know us.
Or ask us a question.
But whatever you do, make sure you hit that follow button wherever you're listening to this podcast.
Send us some fan mail using the link in the show notes or leave a review.
Leaving that review really does help others find us. But if you want to, you can email Kat directly at
infoonthegopodcast@gmail.com.
I think you mostly read those anyway. All of this is in the show notes. Till next time.
Stay curious.
Don't check into any rooms if the person's name is Burke or Hare. Sorry for any Burke or Hares out there.
Right.
Anyway, I had fun with this one.
Me too.
Hey, listen up, all of my workforce friends out there, whether you're ranchers, farmers, or you just need a pair of good leather gloves, look no further than Bare Knuckles, the best leather gloves ever made, featuring a patent design crafted for natural curve of the fingers. These gloves deliver a perfect fit, superior protection, and all-day comfort. Made from premium leather, right now get an exclusive 15% off, and you can find that at buybareknuckles.com, but make sure you use our code INFOGO at checkout. You can find that link in the show notes. Upgrade your hands, and remember, every purchase, well, it supports the show, so thank you.
If you love unforgettable treats, you've got to try Molly B's Gourmet Cookies. These aren't your average cookies. Molly B's brings bold, artisan crafted cookies straight to your pantry. We're talking chocolate, cherry, and amaretto and Be Cordial, Earl Grey, lavender, white chocolate, and lemon glaze in the tea, even maple, bacon, whiskey, and white chocolate in the Boss Man. Founded by a single mom from Alaska, Molly B's has become a national sensation. You get 10% off any product using our code INFOGO at mollybees.com. Find the link in the show notes.